November 21st, 2004. 20 years ago today, Nintendo launched a handheld device so revolutionary it set multiple records in the gaming industry. It became Nintendo's best-selling console, the best-sold handheld, and, compared to all gaming devices that ever existed, the second best-sold gaming console of all time, and has kept all these records still to this day. That, of course, is the Nintendo DS. Its breakout success would lead to newer model types getting released with updated designs and even exclusive new features, being the DS Lite and DSi respectively, before finally being succeeded by the Nintendo 3DS. The DS was just such a fascinating device to own in the pre-smartphone era. And yes, hardcore Nintendo fans, before you say it, I am aware this isn't their first handheld with dual screens, the first being their 1982 Game & Watch. But the DS was way more than just having two screens. It was a gaming handheld that had free text messaging, let you send drawn pictures to people for free, play multiplayer games online, download game content online, and more. Now I know those things sound mundane thanks to modern technology, especially to those of you watching who were born long after its launch, but it's still nice to look back and reflect on a time when we didn't have these luxuries at our fingertips. Because back then, this was everyone's first time being exposed to such technology, specifically on a mainstream level, before revolutionaries like Steve Jobs would create the first smartphone 3 years later. For viewers in your mid-20s and up, this would be a nice nostalgia trip. And for younger viewers, you guys get to have a glimpse of how life was like for kids growing up when the DS was just coming out. Here's my full experience with the Nintendo DS. And by full, I mean as much as I remember. As a kid, I wasn't interested in getting a DS when it first came out, but I won't lie, I was a little curious at first, because I saw a few of my classmates flex their DSs by using them to send each other text messages and drawn pictures in class without the teacher noticing. And it honestly looked cool. We were in elementary school, so most of us didn't have cell phones. Even if you did, back then it was common to have to pay to text people, so the few people at school who did own one either had to text short messages or refrain from texting altogether so they wouldn't get in trouble with their parents when the monthly phone bill came in. So no doubt, when they saw other classmates use a device that can send texts and more for free, they were definitely jealous. Eventually, I stopped caring about wanting a DS since, at the end of the day, my Game Boy Advance and PlayStation 2 games and demo discs were enough entertainment for me. It wouldn't be until a year later when my younger sibling asked our parents for a DS because they really wanted this new game that came out called Pokemon Troze. The reason why was because of the cutesy looking art style and that catchy song in its commercial. The gameplay consisted of faces of different Pokemon falling into a grid. The player is tasked with matching the same Pokemon faces together by swapping them with other Pokemon to make the matching ones disappear. The point is to empty the grid and make space for the new Pokemon constantly falling in. If the grid fills to the top without you matching enough Pokemon in time, the game is over. It's basically Tetris combined with Candy Crush. It's actually a really good game, by the way, and its existence is the reason I finally got to experience using the DS for the first time in my life. Not only could I use it to play DS games, but I was excited, well, half excited, when I realized that empty slot on the bottom can be used to play Game Boy Advance games too. I say half excited because it couldn't play original Game Boy games, meaning I had to hop back to my GBA if I wanted to play Super Mario Land 2 6 Golden Coins, or Mario Tennis, or that nightmare fuel, Conker's Pocket Tales. Ugh, that game over screen kept me up at night as a kid. Still don't know why my parents got me that game. Anyways, the DS was a fun device to play with, even though this was the only actual DS we had at the time. You know, I've never really talked about the technology behind a certain aspect of the DS, and there's a reason why I'm bringing this up now, which I'll get into in a moment. Specifically, I'm talking about the DS's dual screens. It's obvious the bottom screen had all the important internals since it's bulkier than the top screen. So how does the top screen work? It's because there are cables inside of the left hinge coming from the bottom screen supplying both power and display to the top screen. And they're not regular cables either. If they were, it'd be easy to accidentally unplug them from the inside due to friction when opening and closing the DS case. Instead, it uses ribbon cables, which are wide, flat, and flexible. In order to properly protect that cable, Nintendo made sure that the hinge covering it was made of strong and durable material. Unfortunately, they did not do the same for the right hinge. I guess since no wires were going through there, Nintendo felt they could cut costs by making that hinge with cheaper materials. This meant that the right hinge was prone to breaking, which is exactly what happened to me and everyone I knew who owned a DS by this point in time. Fortunately, Nintendo would fix this issue 2 years later when making the DS Lite and DSi, all thanks to us having to suffer first. So to anyone whose first DS were either of those two systems or any of the 3DSs, you're welcome. Moving on from that little rant, my birthday, 2006. I asked my parents for this new game that came out earlier in the year. I was a big fan of Mario at this point and I really wanted to try it out. And that game was New Super Mario Bros., a reboot of the 1980 Super Mario series from the NES. Nowadays, the New Super Mario Bros. Games are seen as a joke because of how uninspired and repetitive they became over the last decade, but back then, it was revolutionary. It was, no pun intended, new. Going from pure 2D to what was known as 2.5D with 3D model graphics on a handheld was insane to see firsthand. At this point, I have a Nintendo Wii. It was out for a couple years at this point, so it was cheap enough for my parents to buy. I was a frequent user of this Wii app called the Nintendo Channel, and thanks to an episode of a show on it called Nintendo Week, I became a fan of this little franchise called Ace Attorney. I don't recall the show ever mentioning if these games were on the DS first, so I ended up playing the first 3 games on the Wii. After that, I wanted to get the next game in the series, Apollo Justice, Ace Attorney. The graphics were insane, and the animations and art style were amazing to look at compared to the Phoenix Wright trilogy. I heard it was on the DS, so I was waiting to hear when it would come to the Wii shop like the other games. Again, I didn't know the other games were on the DS too, so I thought Capcom was just making their franchise move consoles or something. It's not like it was a problem to get it for the DS, it just would have been more convenient to have all the Ace Attorney games on one platform. Never mind. I lied. There was a problem getting it for the DS. No, actually, 2. For one, none of the game stores in my neighborhood sold it, since it was a 2-year-old game at the time. And even if they did, I heard from both word of mouth and online that the game apparently wasn't good. And I wasn't about to have my parents buy me a game I wouldn't like and be stuck with until my next birthday. Luckily, a new Ace Attorney game came out this year that got tons of good reviews across the board. And that was Ace Attorney Investigations, Miles Edgeworth. Loved the new gameplay style, game mechanics, and story. And it was a really nice touch of Capcom to add some immersion to their DS Ace Attorney games by letting you use the DS's microphone to shout objections and other phrases instead of using button prompts if you wanted. Unfortunately, its sequel would be stuck in Japan for the next 13 years due to the first game's poor sales in America. I wish that wasn't the case. I really would have loved to have had a physical copy to add right next to my copy of the first game. Luckily, I got to play an awesome fan translation on my DS emulator, which I do suggest you guys try, because Eustace Winner? Really? That was the best name Capcom could come up with? Anyways, in all seriousness, please at least make sure you buy the official version that came out a few months ago. I know a lot of you Ace Attorney fans played the fan translation version back in 2014, but if Capcom sees the good sales numbers for this game, that might encourage them to make a third Miles Edgeworth game, finally giving him his own trilogy, which is strange it took so long since the newer character in comparison, Apollo, got a whole trilogy before he did. Now before this goes from a DS retrospective into an Ace Attorney video, let's get back on track, by going on another tangent. Gamefly. Anyone remember Gamefly? It was a company that, under a super cheap subscription plan, allowed you to rent any game you wanted. You chose the game on their website, and they mailed it to you. You can play it as long as you want, and when you're done or want to borrow a different game, you just mail it back. My parents only subscribed to them a handful of times, I think maybe 2 or 3, and that was only during summer vacation from school, and even then it was only a few months of summer vacation. I bring them up because even though I mainly use their service to get PS2 games, I did get a DS game I was interested in, Rhythm Heaven. Now, the only experience I had with rhythm games were in the Sly Cooper games, and a demo of Space Channel 5 Part 2, and I only heard about Rhythm Heaven through the line of DS commercials Nintendo made with the biggest Disney celebrities and pop stars, but I was willing to give it a try, and I really had fun with it, as the game really pushed the limits in the ways of controlling and handling the DS console. I do remember getting hand cramps for playing too long trying to get perfect rank, since many of the games required you to use the stylus to tap, hold, and or swipe the touchscreen back to back in quick succession. Now let's get back on track, for real this time. Remember earlier when I mentioned the Nintendo channel? Well, not only was a channel for watching Nintendo Week, you could also watch trailers for upcoming Wii and DS games. More importantly, they also offered a service called the DS Download service. Throughout the year, demos for DS games would temporarily be up for download on the Nintendo channel, and if you owned a DS, you could use one of its features known as DS Download Play in conjunction with the Wii's Nintendo channel to wirelessly receive game data. However, since DSs did not have internal storage, you could only play these demos as long as the DS was powered on, since the demos were saved in its RAM. So once you shut off the DS, you'd need to re-download the demo to play it again. One thing to note is you actually didn't need to own a Wii console to have access to these demos. In select retail stores, there would be special Nintendo DS download stations that offered the same game demos as the Nintendo channels. You could easily download your demo of choice to your DS and play it in the store, or close your DS and play it when you got back home. I've never seen any of these download stations in person before since no store in my neighborhood had one, but trust me when I say I was completely fine with the Wii's version since I could download demos in the comfort of my own home as many times as I wanted. One demo that really stuck with me was one of a game called Avalon Code. I wasn't really into RPGs like that at the time, but something about it just intrigued me. I don't remember if it was its graphics, music, or gameplay mechanics, but it interested me enough to convince my parents to buy me the retail version of the game. And I loved it. I do remember that the game made you choose to play either as a boy or a girl, and your choice determined which characters you could bond with in the game. Basically Fire Emblem, but with gender-exclusive content. I'm not sure if that gave you a different ending or if you got exclusive abilities, since I've only played the guy route in full, barely played the girl route, and it's been so long since I've played the game as a whole. I definitely need to get back into it again. I want to get back to something I lightly touched on a few minutes ago, the DS Download Play. DS Download Play was a powerful yet underrated feature most people don't really talk about. Not only was it used to download game demos, but you could also use it to play multiplayer games without needing link cables like you would for the Game Boy family. And also, unlike the Game Boy family, only one person needs to own the game in order to play multiplayer with others. Nearly all DS games that offer multiplayer follow this rule. That's how I played New Super Mario Bros. Multiplayer with a friend for the first time. I had the game, and they used the download service on their DS to download the multiplayer portion of the game to play with me. I do wish more modern game devs did this. I get why they don't, more profit to be made if people buy more copies and the studio stays afloat. But still, the only time in recent memory I've seen any game, much less a AAA game, allow you to play with someone online without them needing a copy of their own would be A Way Out. 2010. Now I know I said I wouldn't talk about Ace Attorney anymore, but just hold on a second, let me explain. So, the creator of the Ace Attorney series, Shu Takumi, wanted to branch out and create a new IP after years of making Ace Attorney games, and he called it Ghost Trick Phantom Detective. Since I was a big fan of his work at this point, I was willing to try out his new game, and I loved it so much, I finished it in a day. I really appreciated its accessibility control scheme where, although it's clearly intended for you to play with a stylus for most of the game, you can play without it completely just by using the D-pad and face buttons. And luckily, outside of a couple instances where you need precision, the game plays just fine. That alternate control scheme really helped the few times my hands got cramped from playing too long. At the end of the day, at least it was a game that, despite having timed, intricate puzzle sections, wasn't too stressful on the hands since the games mostly consisted of dialogue portions that could be advanced using the face buttons. I mean, imagine having to play a more intense game in comparison, like an action-adventure title or something that only used the stylus, with no way to use a different control scheme. If I heard of a game like that, best believe I would definitely never play that. Anyways, let's pivot a bit from Ace Attorney or its adjacent series. Instead, let's talk about its genre, the visual novel. I genuinely can't remember how I heard about it, maybe online comments or something, but I became interested in a game from that same genre called 999, 9 Hours, 9 Persons, 9 Doors. Since I couldn't get another game this year, I watched a playthrough of it on YouTube instead. I was interested all the way through, had questions about the story, and scrolled through a website where its creator, Kotaro Uchikoshi, answered tons of fan-submitted questions. And after seeing the game's true ending, I sat there, hoping for a sequel, and promised myself I'll buy it the day it comes out. At the start of this video, I spoke a bit about smartphones, and now that we're nearing the end of this video, I thought I'd go into more detail here in what I call the beginning of the Nintendo DS's decline. Not just of the original DS, but also its younger siblings and successor, the 3DS. Over time, smartphones became more prominent around the world. They were small, sleek, and capable of doing a lot more than just calling, texting, and playing Snake and Breakout. Not only did many smartphones come pre-installed with convenient software such as calendars/event reminders, note-taking, and calculators, the sort of things you used to need to purchase a PDA for, they were capable of downloading other specialized software off the internet called applications, or apps for short. You could download apps for just about anything, many of which were free. They ranged from super helpful to absolutely useless and gimmicky. But no one cared. Owning a smartphone was like getting to explore a brand new, uncharted world. This must have been what people in the 80s and 90s felt like when they used the internet for the first time. Nearly everyone owned a smartphone, more so in developed nations. It was to the point where the number of smartphone owners eclipsed DS owners 100 times over. Even more so for the DS's successor, the 3DS, which, despite doing well in its own right, only sold a little under half the amount of its older brother. Game developers took both notice and advantage of this by focusing their efforts on the new and emerging mobile gaming market, to the dismay of many traditional gamers at the time. However, looking back and knowing what we know now, it was the smartest move for game devs to at least have some stake in the mobile gaming market. When you own a device that's capable of both communication and multiple forms of entertainment, and is small enough to easily fit in any pocket size, you'd be hard-pressed to want to go out and buy a dedicated portable gaming device that does most of the things I listed, but at an inferior quality. Human beings, yes, including you guys watching this video, have some level of laziness in the sense that we'll always stick with what's most convenient and easy for us to deal with. This is not an inherently negative thing, as that innate behavior helps us save time and sometimes resources in the long run. That's why people tend to frequent the same food spots, grocery stores, websites, software, and more no matter what issues those places may have. Gaming-wise, it's why most people didn't own multiple consoles of the same generation. Nintendo would eventually learn from this too, which is why not only did they release games on mobile devices, but their current game system, the Nintendo Switch, is both a home and portable console. And they have no plans of releasing another dedicated handheld system after discontinuing support for the 3DS, bringing a definite end to the DS family. And here we are now, 2024. In respect to the DS's history, I wanted to do something special other than just making this video. So I decided to host a 24/7 livestream where I play DS games. I'll keep the livestream going until the end of March 2025. This is because the last place in the world the DS released in was in Europe on March 11th, 2005. I'll put the link to the livestream in the description down below, so feel free to pop in whenever you feel like and comment. Keep things civil of course, but I trust you guys will do that since you've done the same here. For now, the livestream will just be recorded playthroughs of every DS game I own, but if you have any recommendations of DS games I should play, let me know and I'll add my recording of it to the stream. But you gotta sell me on it. Don't just write a name and call it a day. Explain why the game you're recommending is worth the recommendation. One final thing I want to say before we wrap things up. This whole video I've been talking about my history with the DS. But what's yours? I guarantee a good chunk of you watching this owned a DS yourselves back then. So I hope this video encourages you guys to make your own retrospective video about Nintendo's Golden Goose handheld, or comment about it down below. I'd love to hear what you guys have to say about it. Keep in mind, there's younger viewers here watching who were too young to experience that era, so give them a little history lesson, especially on aspects I didn't mention because I didn't have much history with it myself or just didn't talk too much about it, like it being the first handheld in gaming history to have a built-in microphone, which you could use for some games and DSi apps. Or, speaking of the DSi, using the DSi. Or those of you who had a DS Lite. At least you guys didn't have to deal with a cheap, easily breakable hinge like I did on the OG version. I want to hear them all. I and other viewers look forward to hearing you guys' stories.
Oh.